The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The neighborhood was quiet, with only the occasional chirping of crickets breaking the silence. It was a typical evening for Marcus Johnson, a 35-year-old black man who lived in a modest house on Maple Street. He had spent most of his day at work, managing logistics for a local shipping company, and now he was finally home, enjoying the calm after a long week. Marcus loved his little corner of the world. His house wasn't fancy, just 2 bedrooms, a small backyard, and a front porch where he liked to sit with a cup of coffee, but it was his. He had worked hard to buy it 3 years ago, saving every penny he could while juggling bills and responsibilities. For him, this place represented stability, safety, and pride. It was a sanctuary from the chaos of life. That evening, Marcus decided to step outside to check the mail. He slipped on his sneakers, grabbed his phone, and headed out the door. As he walked down the driveway, he noticed Mrs. Harper across the street watering her flowers. She gave him a polite wave, which he returned with a smile. Everything seemed normal, peaceful even. But as Marcus bent over to pick up the stack of envelopes from the mailbox, he heard footsteps behind him. At first, he didn't think much of it. People often took evening walks around the block, and it wasn't unusual to hear someone passing by. But then, a voice cut through the stillness like a knife. "What are you doing here?" the voice demanded sharply. Marcus straightened up, slowly turning to see who had spoken. Standing a few feet away was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 40s. His face was red, and his eyes narrowed into slits as he glared at Marcus. This was Carl Thompson, one of Marcus's neighbors. They had exchanged pleasantries once or twice when they bumped into each other, but nothing more. Carl always struck Marcus as gruff and distant, though he never imagined their interactions would turn hostile. "I live here," Marcus replied calmly, holding up the letters in his hand as if to prove his point. "Just checking my mail." Carl scoffed loudly, crossing his arms over his chest. "You don't belong here," he spat out, his tone dripping with venom. "This is a nice neighborhood. We don't need your kind bringing trouble." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "Your kind." Those 2 words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had heard them before, in school, at work, even in public places where people thought he wouldn't notice. Each time they carried the same weight of prejudice and ignorance. But hearing them now in his own neighborhood made his blood boil. "I've lived here for 3 years," Marcus said firmly, trying to keep his voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside him. "I pay my taxes, I take care of my property, and I'm part of this community just like anyone else." Carl snorted dismissively. "Yeah, right, you think buying a house makes you one of us? Look at yourself. You're not fooling anyone." Marcus clenched his fists, resisting the urge to lash out. He knew better than to let this man provoke him. Losing his temper wouldn't solve anything. It would only give Carl exactly what he wanted, an excuse to escalate the situation. Instead, Marcus took a deep breath and focused on staying composed. "Listen," Marcus began, his tone measured but firm. "I don't know what your problem is, but I'm not going anywhere. This is my home, and I have every right to be here." Carl stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space. Up close, Marcus could smell the faint scent of alcohol on his breath. So that was it. This confrontation wasn't about race or property values. It was about Carl being drunk and looking for someone to bully. "You're trespassing," Carl growled, jabbing a finger toward Marcus's chest. "Get off my street before I call the cops." Marcus blinked in disbelief. "Your street?" he repeated incredulously. "Last I checked, this is a public road, and besides, we're standing in front of my house." Carl sneered, clearly uninterested in logic or facts. "Don't play smart with me, boy. You know damn well what I mean." The word boy stung more than Marcus cared to admit. It was a loaded term, one that carried centuries of oppression and degradation. Hearing it directed at him in such a condescending manner made his skin crawl. Still, he refused to let Carl see how much it affected him. By now, a small crowd had started to gather. Neighbors peeked out of windows or lingered near their doors, curious about the commotion. Some looked concerned, while others seemed eager to watch the drama unfold. Marcus spotted Mrs. Harper among them, her watering can forgotten on the sidewalk. Her expression was unreadable, but she didn't step forward to intervene. For a moment, Marcus considered calling the police himself. After all, Carl was the one acting aggressively, harassing him without cause. But then doubt crept in. Would the officers believe him, or would they side with Carl simply because he was white? Stories of racial profiling and unfair treatment flooded his mind, making him hesitate. Instead, Marcus chose a different approach. He locked eyes with Carl, refusing to back down. "If you have a problem with me living here, that's on you," he said evenly. "But I'm not leaving. Not tonight, not ever. Get used to it." Carl opened his mouth to retort, but no words came out. For the first time since the confrontation began, he looked unsure of himself. Maybe it was the conviction in Marcus's voice, or maybe it was the realization that he couldn't intimidate this particular neighbor. Whatever the reason, Carl hesitated, and that gave Marcus the upper hand. Without another word, Carl turned on his heel and stomped back toward his house, muttering under his breath. Marcus watched him go, his heart pounding in his chest. Only when Carl disappeared inside did Marcus exhale, feeling a mix of relief and frustration wash over him. As the crowd dispersed and the neighborhood returned to its usual quiet, Marcus stood there for a moment longer, staring at his mailbox. This wasn't how he imagined his evening would go. He had come outside expecting peace, not hostility. Yet here he was, reminded once again of the ugliness that lurked beneath the surface of everyday life. With a sigh, Marcus went back inside, closing the door firmly behind him. He leaned against it for a moment, letting the tension drain from his body. Then he picked up his phone and dialed a number. Someone needed to know what had happened tonight, not just for his sake, but for everyone else who might find themselves in a similar situation someday. Little did Marcus know this incident was only the beginning. What started as a confrontation between two neighbors would soon ripple outward, touching lives far beyond Maple Street. And in the days to come, Marcus would discover just how strong he truly was, and how determined he was to fight for justice no matter the cost. The next morning, Marcus woke up feeling restless. He had barely slept, his mind replaying the confrontation with Carl over and over again. Every time he closed his eyes, he could still hear that voice, angry, dismissive, and laced with hate. It wasn't just what Carl said. It was the way he said it, like Marcus didn't deserve to exist in his own home. Marcus knew he couldn't let the incident slide. Ignoring racism never solved anything. It only gave people like Carl permission to keep acting on their prejudices, but standing up for himself came with risks. Would speaking out make things worse? Could it escalate into something more dangerous? These questions weighed heavily on him as he got ready for work. Before leaving the house, Marcus decided to do something proactive. He opened his laptop and typed a detailed account of what had happened the previous evening. He described how Carl had approached him, the hateful words exchanged, and the growing crowd of neighbors who watched silently without intervening. When he finished writing, Marcus posted the story on social media under the hashtag #MyMapleStreetStory. Ed Tiu. First, nothing seemed to happen. Marcus went about his day focusing on meetings and deadlines at work, but when he checked his phone during lunch, he saw dozens of notifications flooding in. Friends, acquaintances, and even strangers had shared his post, commenting with messages of support. Some expressed outrage at Carl's behavior, while others shared their own experiences of facing discrimination in predominantly white neighborhoods. One comment stood out to Marcus. A woman named Lisa, who lived 2 streets away, wrote, "I saw everything last night. I wanted to say something, but I froze. I'm so sorry you had to deal with that alone." Her apology struck a chord with Marcus. It wasn't her fault she hadn't spoken up. He understood how intimidating it could be to challenge someone like Carl, but it highlighted a bigger issue. Too many people stayed silent when they witnessed injustice, either out of fear or apathy. And that silence allowed hatred to fester. By the end of the day, Marcus's post had gone viral. Local news outlets picked up the story, interviewing residents of Maple Street and sparking heated debates online. Some defended Carl, claiming he was just looking out for the neighborhood, while others condemned his actions as blatant racism. The divide was clear, and it mirrored similar conversations happening across the country. When Marcus returned home that evening, he noticed a group of reporters gathered near the entrance to the subdivision. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward, and curious onlookers lingered nearby, eager to catch a glimpse of the man at the center of the controversy. Marcus felt a pang of unease. He hadn't expected this level of attention. All he wanted was to live his life in peace, not become the face of a national debate. As he parked his car and stepped onto the sidewalk, one of the reporters approached him. "Mr. Johnson, can we get a statement?" she asked, holding her recorder close to his face. Marcus hesitated. Talking to the media wasn't part of his plan, but avoiding them wouldn't help either. If he remained silent, others might twist the narrative to suit their agendas. Taking a deep breath, he nodded and addressed the crowd. "I don't want anyone to think I'm seeking attention," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the swarm of cameras around him. "All I want is for people to treat each other with respect. What happened yesterday wasn't just about me. It's about the kind of community we choose to build. Are we going to let fear and ignorance divide us, or are we going to stand together against hate?" His words resonated with many, earning applause from some bystanders. Others, however, muttered disapprovingly under their breath. Among them was Carl, who stood glaring from his front yard. His arms were crossed tightly over his chest, and his jaw was clenched so hard it looked like it might shatter. For once, he didn't have anything to say. Instead, he turned and retreated into his house, slamming the door behind him. Later that night, Marcus received a call from Detective Ramirez, a local police officer assigned to investigate the incident. Though Marcus hadn't filed an official complaint, the department had been inundated with calls from concerned citizens demanding action. "Mr. Johnson, I understand you've been through a lot," Detective Ramirez said gently. "Would you be willing to file a report against Mr. Thompson? We can't ignore behavior like this." Marcus thought carefully before answering. Filing a report would mean dragging Carl into court, exposing both of them to public scrutiny. On the other hand, doing nothing would send the message that such behavior was acceptable. After a long pause, Marcus replied, "Yes, I'll file a report. Not because I want revenge, but because no one should have to feel unsafe in their own home." Detective Ramirez assured him that the case would be handled professionally, though she warned him that legal proceedings could take months. In the meantime, she advised Marcus to stay vigilant and report any further incidents immediately. As the days passed, tensions in the neighborhood continued to rise. Some residents rallied behind Marcus, organizing community meetings to discuss ways to combat racism and promote inclusivity. Flyers were distributed inviting everyone to participate, regardless of their background. At these gatherings, people shared stories, brainstormed ideas, and pledged to support one another in creating a safer environment. However, not everyone welcomed the change. Carl's supporters grew bolder, posting flyers of their own, accusing Marcus of stirring up trouble and ruining the peaceful atmosphere of Maple Street. Anonymous notes appeared on Marcus's doorstep, filled with threats and insults. One read, "Go back where you came from." Another simply said, "You'll regret this." Despite the hostility, Marcus refused to back down. He leaned on his friends and family for strength, drawing inspiration from their unwavering support. His sister, Jasmine, reminded him of the importance of perseverance. "They're scared, Marcus," she told him during one of their late-night phone calls. "Scared of change, scared of losing control. Don't let them win by giving up." Meanwhile, Carl became increasingly isolated. Fewer people visited his house, and those who did whispered nervously about the ongoing investigation. His wife, Margaret, tried to reason with him, urging him to apologize and move on. "You're making us look bad, Carl," she snapped one evening after yet another argument. "This isn't worth it." But Carl was too stubborn to listen. He convinced himself that Marcus was exaggerating the situation for attention, that the entire ordeal was blown out of proportion. Deep down, though, he couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at him. Late at night, when the house was quiet, he stared at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation in his mind. He wondered if he'd made a mistake, but pride kept him from admitting it. Back at Marcus's house, preparations for the upcoming trial began. Lawyers reviewed evidence, witnesses were interviewed, and statements were drafted. Marcus knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew it was necessary. This wasn't just about justice for himself. It was about setting an example for future generations. On one particularly stressful evening, Marcus sat on his porch staring at the stars. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers. Despite everything, he felt a glimmer of hope. Change was slow, messy, and often painful, but it was possible. And as long as there were people willing to fight for it, there was always a chance for a better tomorrow. Little did Marcus know, the battle was far from over. The trial would bring new challenges, forcing him to confront not only Carl's racism, but also the systemic issues that allowed it to thrive. Yet with every obstacle, Marcus grew stronger, more determined to prove that love and unity could overcome even the deepest divides. The day of the trial arrived, casting a heavy cloud over Maple Street. Marcus woke up early, his stomach churning with nerves. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, reviewing evidence, practicing his testimony, and steeling himself for whatever might happen in court. But no amount of preparation could fully ease the weight of what he was about to face. This wasn't just another legal proceeding. It was a public reckoning, one that would put his character, his values, and his very identity under scrutiny as they go. He dressed in a crisp suit, a gift from his father years ago. He thought about all the people counting on him. Friends, neighbors, strangers who had followed his story online. They were watching, hoping for justice. Marcus knew he couldn't let them down. More importantly, he couldn't let himself down. When he stepped outside, the sight of news vans parked along the curb reminded him how much attention this case had drawn. Reporters hovered near the entrance to the courthouse, cameras ready to capture every detail. Marcus took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and walked past them without comment. He didn't need to say anything yet. Today, the courtroom would speak for itself. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The gallery buzzed with whispered conversations as spectators filled the benches. Some wore shirts emblazoned with slogans supporting racial equality, while others carried signs advocating for neighborhood safety. Among the crowd, Marcus spotted familiar faces. Lisa, the woman who had apologized for staying silent during the confrontation. Mrs. Harper clutching her purse tightly as she sat quietly in the back row, and even a few co-workers who had taken time off work to show their support. Carl, on the other hand, looked defiant. Dressed in a dark suit, he stood beside his lawyer, occasionally glancing at Marcus with thinly veiled hostility. His wife Margaret sat behind him, her expression unreadable. She hadn't spoken publicly since the incident, but rumors swirled that she regretted not leaving Carl sooner. Whether or not those rumors were true remained unclear. The judge entered the room, calling everyone to order. The proceedings began with opening statements. Marcus's attorney, Ms. Patel, was calm and composed as she outlined the case against Carl. She emphasized the verbal harassment, the threat of violence, and the broader implications of allowing such behavior to go unpunished. This isn't just about one man confronting another, Ms. Patel said, her voice firm. It's about protecting the rights of individuals to live freely and safely in their communities, regardless of their race. Carl's lawyer countered by painting Marcus as someone seeking attention, accusing him of exaggerating the situation for personal gain. My client may have been blunt, the defense argued, but free speech is protected under the law. Mr. Thompson was merely expressing his concerns about neighborhood security. The argument struck a nerve with Marcus. Concerns about security? That was rich coming from a man whose only concern seemed to be keeping people like Marcus out of the neighborhood. Still, he kept his emotions in check, reminding himself that losing his temper wouldn't help his cause. As the trial progressed, witnesses took the stand. Lisa recounted what she had seen that evening, describing Carl's aggressive demeanor and Marcus's calm response. Her testimony painted a vivid picture of the confrontation, earning nods of approval from Marcus's supporters. Mrs. Harper also spoke, though her account was less detailed. She admitted to witnessing the altercation, but claimed she hadn't heard everything clearly. Her reluctance to take sides frustrated some in the audience, but Marcus understood her hesitation. Not everyone was ready to step into the spotlight. Then it was Marcus's turn to testify. As he walked to the witness stand, the room fell silent. All eyes were on him, waiting to hear his side of the story. Under questioning from Ms. Patel, Marcus described the events leading up to the confrontation, the ordinary act of checking his mail, the sudden appearance of Carl, and the barrage of insults that followed. He spoke slowly and deliberately, choosing his words carefully to ensure there was no room for misinterpretation. "I wasn't trespassing," Marcus said, looking directly at the jury. "I wasn't causing trouble. I was simply living my life like anyone else has the right to do. When Mr. Thompson called me names and told me I didn't belong here, it wasn't just hurtful. It was dehumanizing. It made me feel like I didn't matter." His voice cracked slightly as he continued. "But I refuse to let fear or hatred dictate how I live. I deserve to feel safe in my own home, and so does everyone else." The courtroom erupted in murmurs, some supportive, others skeptical. When Carl's lawyer cross-examined him, the questions grew sharper, more accusatory. "Isn't it true you posted about this incident online before speaking to authorities?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Were you trying to sway public opinion?" Marcus remained unfazed. "I shared my experience because I believed it was important," he replied evenly. "Too often, stories like mine are ignored or dismissed. I wanted people to know the truth, not just about what happened, but about the kind of world we're living in." By the time the trial ended, the jury deliberated for hours. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, with both sides anxiously awaiting the verdict. Finally, the foreperson stood and announced their decision: guilty on charges of harassment and intimidation. A collective gasp rippled through the room, quickly followed by applause from Marcus's supporters. For Marcus, relief washed over him, like a tidal wave. Justice had been served, or at least a small measure of it, yet he knew this victory was bittersweet. The trial had exposed deep divisions within the community, revealing cracks that couldn't be patched overnight. And while Carl faced consequences for his actions, the underlying prejudices that fueled his behavior remained unaddressed. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Marcus, eager for his reaction. Instead of celebrating, he used the opportunity to deliver a message. "This isn't the end," he said, his tone measured but resolute. "It's a beginning. We can't stop fighting until every person feels valued and respected, no matter where they come from or what they look like." His words resonated far beyond Maple Street. Across social media platforms, hashtags like #OurJusticeForMarcus and Stand Against Hate trended for days. People praised his courage, calling him a symbol of resilience in the face of adversity. But Marcus didn't want to be a symbol. He just wanted to live his life without fear. Back home, however, things weren't entirely peaceful. Though the trial was over, tensions lingered. Anonymous threats continued to appear on Marcus's doorstep, forcing him to install security cameras around his property. Carl, now required to attend anger management classes and pay a fine, avoided eye contact whenever they crossed paths. His supporters grumbled bitterly, accusing Marcus of ruining lives instead of fostering harmony. Yet amidst the hostility, there were glimmers of hope. Many residents rallied around Marcus, organizing fundraisers to cover his legal fees and hosting workshops on anti-racism. Kids in the neighborhood started drawing pictures of unity, pinning them to bulletin boards at the local library. Slowly but surely, change began to take root. One evening, as Marcus sat on his porch watching the sunset, Lisa approached him hesitantly. "Can I sit?" she asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside him. Marcus nodded, offering her a warm smile. Of course. They talked for hours, sharing thoughts about the trial, the neighborhood, and the future. Lisa confessed that she wished she had intervened sooner, apologizing again for her silence. Marcus listened patiently, assuring her that her presence now meant more than she realized. "It's never too late to make a difference," he told her. "What matters is that we keep moving forward, together." As the conversation wound down, Lisa promised to stay involved, vowing to use her privilege to amplify marginalized voices. For Marcus, it was a reminder that progress wasn't achieved alone. It took courage, compassion, and collaboration to build a better world. Still, challenges lay ahead. The verdict had sent shockwaves through Maple Street, forcing residents to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their community. Some embraced the opportunity for growth while others dug their heels in, resistant to change. And somewhere in the shadows, seeds of resentment festered, threatening to erupt once again. But Marcus refused to dwell on the negatives. He chose, instead, to focus on the positives, the newfound alliances, the acts of kindness, and the determination to create lasting change. Whatever came next, he vowed to face it head-on, armed with the knowledge that he wasn't alone. Little did he know, the journey was far from over. The fight for justice wasn't confined to a single courtroom or neighborhood. It was a battle being waged across cities, states, and nations. And Marcus Johnson, whether he liked it or not, had become part of something much bigger than himself. The weeks following the trial brought a mix of triumphs and trials for Marcus. On one hand, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The verdict had validated his experience and sent a powerful message that racism would not be tolerated in Maple Street or anywhere else for that matter. Yet on the other hand, the backlash was relentless. Anonymous notes with hateful messages kept appearing at his doorstep. Some neighbors avoided him altogether, while others whispered behind his back, accusing him of tearing apart the peaceful fabric of their community. Despite the hostility, Marcus refused to retreat into silence. He understood that moments like these were opportunities to challenge ignorance and foster understanding. So instead of retreating, he leaned further into activism. With the support of allies who shared his vision, Marcus began organizing workshops and discussions aimed at addressing racial bias and promoting inclusivity. These events weren't just about calling out prejudice, they were about creating safe spaces where people could ask questions, share experiences, and learn from one another. One Saturday morning, Marcus hosted his first workshop in the local community center. The room buzzed with anticipation as attendees trickled in, some eager to participate, others hesitant but curious. Lisa was there, along with Mrs. Harper, who had finally decided to step out of her comfort zone. Even a few teenagers showed up, inspired by Marcus's courage and determination. Marcus opened the session by sharing his story again, this time focusing not on anger or pain, but on hope and resilience. "I'm not here because I hate anyone," he said, looking around the room. "I'm here because I believe we can do better, for ourselves, for our kids, and for future generations." His words struck a chord with many. One attendee, a middle-aged white man named Greg, stood up during the Q&A portion. "I'll admit I didn't think much about race before all this," Greg confessed, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "But hearing you talk made me realize how blind I've been. I want to help, but I don't know where to start." Marcus smiled warmly. "Start by listening," he replied. "Listen to people whose lives are different from yours. Ask questions when you don't understand. And most importantly, speak up when you see injustice, even if it makes you uncomfortable." The workshop ended with applause and promises to stay engaged. For the first time in months, Marcus felt optimistic about the direction things were heading. But outside the walls of the community center, resistance simmered just beneath the surface. Carl Thompson, now relegated to the role of a pariah, seethed with resentment. The trial had humiliated him, stripping away whatever authority or respect he once commanded in the neighborhood. His wife, Margaret, had finally left him, citing irreconcilable differences. Alone and bitter, Carl spent his days nursing grudges and plotting revenge. Late one night, as Marcus returned home from running errands, he noticed something unusual. A group of men loitered near Carl's house, their faces obscured by hoodies. They exchanged hushed whispers, glancing occasionally toward Marcus's driveway. Instinctively, Marcus quickened his pace, his heart pounding. When he reached his door, he locked it immediately and checked the security cameras installed after the trial. Sure enough, the men lingered for several minutes before dispersing into the darkness. Marcus debated whether to report the incident to the police, but he hesitated. Without concrete evidence, it would be difficult to prove anything. Besides, involving law enforcement might escalate tensions further. Instead, he called Detective Ramirez, updating her on the situation. She assured him she'd keep an eye on Carl and his associates, though she couldn't promise constant surveillance. Over the next few weeks, similar incidents occurred. Cars slowed down suspiciously outside Marcus's house. Strange noises echoed through the night. Once, someone spray-painted a racial slur on his garage door. Each act of vandalism stung deeply, reminding Marcus that hatred dies hard. Still, he refused to let fear dictate his life. With every fresh insult, he doubled down on his efforts to bring the community together. One evening, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. It was Mrs. Harper, clutching a casserole dish tightly in her hands. She looked nervous, almost apologetic, as she approached his porch. "Hi, Marcus," she said softly. I baked this for you. I hope it's okay." Marcus blinked in surprise. Mrs. Harper had always been polite but distant, rarely engaging beyond casual pleasantries. Her sudden gesture caught him off guard. "Thank you," he said, accepting the dish with a smile. "That's very kind of you." Mrs. Harper hesitated, then added, "I wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. I should have done more to help when Carl confronted you. I saw what happened, and I stayed silent. That wasn't right." Her admission touched Marcus. "It takes courage to admit that," he replied gently. "And I appreciate your honesty. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next." Mrs. Harper nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I want to do better," she whispered. "If there's anything I can do to help, please let me know." From that day forward, Mrs. Harper became one of Marcus's strongest supporters. She attended every workshop, encouraged her friends to join, and even volunteered to organize fundraisers. Her transformation inspired others to reconsider their own roles in perpetuating or challenging systemic racism. Meanwhile, Carl grew increasingly desperate. His attempts to intimidate Marcus had failed miserably, drawing criticism from even his remaining allies. Frustrated and cornered, he resorted to drastic measures. Late one Friday night, Marcus woke up to the sound of shattering glass. Rushing to his living room, he discovered that someone had thrown a brick through his window. Attached to the brick was a note. "Leave now, or worse will happen." This time, Marcus didn't hesitate. He called the police immediately, providing them with footage from his security cameras. Within hours, officers arrived at Carl's house, arresting him on suspicion of vandalism and harassment. Though Carl denied involvement, the evidence was damning. Once again, he found himself facing legal consequences for his actions. As news of Carl's arrest spread, reactions were mixed. Some residents expressed relief, believing the neighborhood would finally find peace. Others, however, accused Marcus of seeking revenge, claiming he had fabricated the incident to ruin Carl's life. Tensions escalated, dividing Maple Street even further. Amidst the chaos, Marcus remained steadfast. He knew the road to healing wouldn't be easy, but he also knew it was worth fighting for. At a follow-up workshop, he addressed the controversy head-on. "Some of you may think I enjoy causing trouble," he said, his voice steady. "But the truth is I don't. All I want is for us to live together in harmony. Yes, there will be challenges. Yes, some people will resist change. But giving up isn't an option. Not when so much is at stake." His speech earned a standing ovation, solidifying his status as a leader in the community. Slowly but surely, attitudes began to shift. More residents joined the cause, volunteering their time and resources to promote equality. The local school district implemented anti-bias training programs, and businesses pledged to hire diverse staff members. Change was happening, one small step at a time. Still, Marcus knew the fight wasn't over. Racism was a deep-rooted problem, and dismantling it required sustained effort. There would always be those who clung to outdated beliefs, unwilling to adapt. But Marcus refused to lose faith. Every person who chose empathy over ignorance, every act of kindness in the face of cruelty, brought him closer to the world he envisioned, a world where everyone belonged. One crisp autumn evening, as Marcus sat on his porch watching leaves dance in the wind, Lisa joined him once again. "You've come such a long way," she remarked, smiling. "Do you feel like things are getting better?" Marcus thought for a moment before answering. "Better? Maybe. Easier? Not really. But I've learned that progress isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. As long as we keep pushing forward, we'll get there." Lisa nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Well, count me in. Whatever happens next, I've got your back." For Marcus, that simple promise meant everything. He realized he wasn't alone in this fight. Together, they could build a brighter future, not just for themselves, but for everyone who called Maple Street home. Little did Marcus know the journey was far from finished. The seeds of change had been planted, but nurturing them would require patience, perseverance, and unwavering resolve. And as he gazed out at the horizon, bathed in golden light, he felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. Months passed, and Maple Street began to transform in ways no one could have predicted. The changes weren't immediate or dramatic. They were subtle, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through a stormy sky. Yet they were undeniable. Marcus's unwavering determination had sparked something powerful within the community, inspiring people to confront their biases and embrace inclusivity. For every neighbor who clung stubbornly to old prejudices, there were two more willing to listen, learn, and grow. Marcus himself had grown stronger too. He carried the weight of his experiences with grace, channeling his pain into action. The workshops he organized became a cornerstone of the neighborhood, drawing participants from nearby towns and cities. People came not just to hear Marcus speak, but to share their own stories, creating a tapestry of voices united by a common goal: equality. One chilly December morning, Marcus stood on the steps of the community center, preparing for another session. Snow dusted the ground and frost clung to the windows, but inside, warmth radiated from the crowd gathered to participate. Among them were familiar faces: Lisa, Mrs. Harper, Detective Ramirez, and new ones, including parents eager to teach their children about acceptance and teenagers passionate about social justice. As Marcus addressed the group, his voice filled with conviction. "We've come so far," he said, looking around at the diverse audience. "But let's not forget why we're here: to create a world where everyone feels safe, valued, and respected. That starts with us, with how we treat each other every single day." The room erupted in applause, a testament to the progress they'd made together. But even as Marcus basked in the moment, he knew challenges still loomed on the horizon. Racism wasn't something that could be eradicated overnight. It was a deeply entrenched system that required constant vigilance to dismantle. Still, Marcus chose to focus on the positives, celebrating each small victory along the way. That evening, as Marcus walked home under a canopy of twinkling stars, he reflected on the past year. So much had changed since the night Carl confronted him outside his house. Back then, he had felt isolated, targeted, and powerless. Now he stood tall, surrounded by allies who shared his vision for a better future. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, anger, and exhaustion, but every step forward had been worth it. When he reached his driveway, Marcus noticed a figure standing near his porch. At first, his heart raced, memories of threats and vandalism flooding back. But as he drew closer, he recognized the silhouette. It was Margaret Thompson, Carl's estranged wife. She looked nervous, clutching her coat tightly around her as if bracing against the cold. "Ms. Johnson?" she called out tentatively. "Can I talk to you?" Marcus hesitated but nodded, gesturing for her to sit on the porch swing. "Of course," he said, taking a seat beside her. "What's on your mind?" Margaret sighed heavily, her breath visible in the frosty air. "I owe you an apology," she began, her voice trembling. "For years I stayed silent while Carl said and did terrible things. I told myself it wasn't my problem, that I couldn't change him. But after everything that happened, the trial, the arrest, I realized I was part of the problem too. By staying quiet, I let his hatred fester, and for that I'm truly sorry." Her words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity. Marcus studied her face, searching for any trace of insincerity. All he found was regret. "Thank you for saying that," he replied softly. "It takes courage to admit when you've been wrong. What matters now is what you do next." Margaret nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I want to help," she said firmly. "Not because I feel guilty, but because I believe in what you're doing. If there's anything I can do to support your work, please let me know." Marcus smiled, touched by her resolve. "There's always room for more allies," he said. "Start by having conversations, difficult ones. Challenge the people in your life to rethink their assumptions. Change begins at home." Margaret promised to do just that, leaving Marcus with a renewed sense of hope. Her transformation reminded him that redemption was possible, even for those who had once stood on the wrong side of history. It was a reminder that humanity was capable of growth, if given the chance. Meanwhile, Carl remained imprisoned, serving time for his crimes. Reports indicated that he had withdrawn further into bitterness, refusing to attend mandated counseling, sessions or engage with fellow inmates. Some speculated he would never change, while others held out hope that rehabilitation might eventually soften his hardened heart. Regardless of the outcome, Marcus refused to dwell on Carl's fate. His energy was better spent focusing on those willing to evolve. As winter gave way to spring, Maple Street blossomed in more ways than one. Flowers sprouted in gardens and laughter echoed through the streets. Neighbors greeted each other warmly, regardless of race or background. Community events drew record attendance, fostering connections that transcended superficial differences. Even the local newspaper ran a feature article highlighting the neighborhood's journey toward unity, crediting Marcus's leadership as a catalyst for change. One sunny afternoon, Marcus received a letter in the mail. It was from a young boy named Jamal, whose family had recently moved to Maple Street. In neat handwriting, Jamal wrote, "Dear Mr. Johnson, thank you for standing up for what's right. My mom says you're a hero, and I think she's right. Because of you, I feel safe here. I hope I can be brave like you someday." The note brought tears to Marcus's eyes. He realized that his actions weren't just shaping the present, they were influencing the future. Children like Jamal would grow up in a world where kindness mattered more than hate, where empathy triumphed over ignorance. That was a legacy worth fighting for. In June, the community held its annual summer festival, a tradition that had previously excluded many residents. This year, however, organizers ensured inclusivity was at the forefront. Booths showcased cultural, foods, music, and art from around the globe. Speakers delivered inspiring messages about unity and resilience. And at the center of it all stood Marcus, smiling as he watched neighbors dance, laugh, and celebrate together. Later that evening, as fireworks lit up the sky, Lisa approached Marcus with a wide grin. "You did it," she said, giving him a playful nudge. "Maple Street will never be the same." Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "We did it," he corrected her. "None of this would have been possible without everyone pitching in." Lisa nodded, her expression turning thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder what's next? Once all this settles down, I mean." Marcus glanced at the crowd, his gaze lingering on families laughing and children chasing fireflies. "There's always more work to do," he admitted. "But for now, I'm content knowing we've planted seeds of change. They'll keep growing, long after we're gone." As the night drew to a close, Marcus returned home, feeling a profound sense of peace. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but he faced it with confidence. He had weathered storms, faced adversaries, and emerged stronger than ever. More importantly, he had inspired others to join him in building a better world. Before heading to bed, Marcus stepped onto his porch one last time. The air was cool, carrying the scent of blooming flowers. Above him, the stars shone brightly, endless and eternal. For a moment he allowed himself to dream, not just of what could be achieved in his lifetime, but of the generations to come. And as he closed his eyes, Marcus whispered a silent promise. This fight isn't over. But together, we'll win.